I will never get married again. Ever. Folks, no one gets married to get divorced. But right now, in the United States, 51% of marriages end in divorce. And sadly, in 2020, I became one of those statistics. I became a divorce casualty. My divorce process was grueling. On any given day, I cycled through the feelings of guilt, shame, remorse, regret, disappointment, embarrassment, anger, fear, frustration, anxiety, insecurity, loneliness, depression, and a whole range of other emotions that were at times excruciating and extremely debilitating. Some days during the process, I carried myself with the utmost grace, class, elegance, and composure. And there were other days where I cried, screamed, and I tried desperately to escape the pain and fill the void. Sometimes through very self-destructive behaviors. That's a whole nother video. As I moved through this year of 2025, it became painfully clear to me, more than ever, that the divorce didn't just affect us, meaning me and my wife and the kids, the entire family. It affected everyone connected to us, directly and indirectly. The children, the adults, were baffled. The grandbabies, they couldn't articulate it, but they knew something had drastically changed. I am, to this day, trying to build connections with them, independent of the marriage, which is very hard because generally, no matter what the circumstances of divorce, the children, they tend to naturally gravitate towards the mother. So, us dads, we tend to be on the outside looking in terms of maintaining deep connection with the children and grandchildren. My ex-wife has had to go through her own growing pains in adjusting to living independently and autonomously. And we are now at least working together to build a new healthy relationship as amicable co-parents and grandparents. So folks, to this day, 5 years later, we are all still trying to find a new normal in it all. At the time, explaining these changes to everyone in our orbit felt like an exercise in futility because I couldn't even explain the changes to myself. Family members on both sides would see us as we were out and about carrying an air of apprehension and trepidation, unsure of what to say to us. Relationships that were once interconnected quietly took sides. The family that I married into and spent many years being very immersed in disappeared from my life entirely. I guess I see, in retrospect, marrying the entire family was part of the package deal. And divorcing the entire family was also a package deal. Only a few people managed to maintain neutral position in our divorce process. When we got married, our wedding ceremony was a very public spectacle. And when we divorced, our marriage was a very public failure. The dismantling of shared business, transitioning from joint ventures to individual ones, was extremely arduous. I stayed closely connected to my therapist during this time. One day, I was having a particularly bad day. I sat in her chair, crying, yelling, and screaming. I was inconsolable. She said something in that session to me that gave me cause to pause. She said, G, your next relationship has to be with you. If not, your growth and evolution will cease. She acknowledged my pain. She affirmed it. She told me it would subside. But she was very clear. The inner work had to be done on me. Being holistically whole, coming back from whence I cometh, is an inside job. She went on to say that this season was an opportunity to discover who I am now, to reinvent myself, to set new goals, to heal so I wouldn't bring the same issues into a new union, to define clear standards, criteria, and boundaries. She told me that by spending intimate time with myself and doing the inner work, I can achieve holistic wholeness, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and financially. Now, folks, I would love to tell you that I took her advice immediately, but I didn't. I jumped right into the dating market after the judge hit the gavel on the divorce papers. I got right on those dating apps. That's a whole nother video also. When I got divorced in 2020, I was originally open and flexible to marriage again someday. I started dating again. I was back on the dating scene at 50 years old. And what I learned about myself, what I learned about middle-aged men, and what I learned about middle-aged women fundamentally changed my whole position. That I would never ever get married again. Ever. I wave the white flag of surrender when it comes to the institution of marriage. Oh, yeah. Wave the white flag of surrender. I surrender when it comes to getting married ever again. I will never marry again. And here are the reasons why. Reason number 1, unresolved emotional baggage. And this first reason is the one that I really had to come to terms with the most. Unresolved emotional baggage. I am no longer willing to merge my life with someone who has not done their internal work to heal from their previous relationships. By the time you reach midlife, unresolved trauma doesn't stay hidden anymore. It shows up. It is illuminated. It is right there in bright neon lights. It shows up as toxicity, dysfunction, chaos, burdens. It shows up through projection, control, and avoidance. And what all of that really creates in a marriage is chronic relational turbulence. Folks, you don't just inherit the person. You inherit all of their mental, emotional, and psychological residue. The residue of past divorces. The residue of unhealed wounds. The residue of family dynamics. The residue of old betrayals that were never processed. And if they have not dealt with it all, they will leak all of those issues all over you. Suddenly, you're not just a partner in marriage. You become the problem solver, the emotional landfill, the planner, the babysitter, the caretaker, the therapist, the fixer, the emotional utility person. Phew. And here's the part that really matters. By midlife, emotional self-regulation is not optional. It is a must. It is up to us as individuals to keep our fears, doubts, insecurities, and inadequacies in check so that we are not leaking them all over other people. I am no longer willing to take on the emotional labor of managing someone else's fears, doubts, insecurities, and inadequacies. At this stage of life, emotional responsibility matters. Self-regulation matters. Self-awareness matters. I believe companionship should be bringing peace, not taking peace. Companionship should not require constant emotional management. Because when someone hasn't done their inner work, you don't just have to love them. You now have to manage them. And it is a full-time job, just managing my own emotions every day. It ain't easy being me. I don't have the holistic energy to manage someone else's emotions. And if you are in the third quarter of life like me, the cost of this is real mental and emotional energy. And you do not have the mental and emotional energy that you once had. Overall, I refuse to love someone else at the expense of myself any longer. Here is the plain truth. Let me keep it 100 with you. By this stage of life, we are all carrying something or some things. Health issues, hormonal shifts, family stress, mobility changes, complex family dynamics, aging and ailing parents, adult children and grandchildren who are navigating their own life struggles, and yes, unresolved trauma from past marriages and relationships. This applies to men and women. Marriage doesn't remove this weight. Take it from me. Call me Exhibit A. When you get married without addressing the systemic issues of the past relationships, the issues are immensely magnified. Because now you have taken this ultimate leap of investment. You went all in. You pushed all your chips in the middle of the table. And there is no escaping it. You have now married each other's baggage. Some people come into the marriage with a carry-on bag. Some people come into the marriage with a 5-piece luggage set. And some people come into the marriage pulling up in a damn U-Haul truck full of stuff. What happens next in the marriage is very subtle. Trust me, I know this from experience. You start avoiding conflict just to keep the peace. You start sweeping issues, grievances, and concerns under the rug. You tell yourself, oh man, it's not worth it. I don't really want to argue today. I don't want to deal with this today. We'll let this ride today. You realize you don't want to deal with constant arguments, power struggles, antagonism, emotional volatility. You don't want to have to negotiate someone's overthinking, hypersensitivity, emotional inconsistency, their need for constant reassuring, their pettiness, their mind games, their unwillingness, the most important, their unwillingness to take accountability overall. You do not want to organize your life around someone else's moods and expectations. That is how codependency begins. Not dramatically, but rather quietly. What people don't realize is that toxicity is not always loud and boisterous. Toxicity can creep in ever so subtly and quietly. You start enabling behavior you would never before accept. You start accepting unacceptable behavior. Marriage does not heal unprocessed wounds. It amplifies them. And I am no longer willing to become collateral damage in someone else's unfinished inner work. So I'll ask you, does that make me shallow? Or does it mean that I have learned the hard way that unhealed wounds don't just disappear in marriage, they tend to multiply? Reason number 2, third-party interference. I am no longer willing to enter a marriage where outside influences are allowed to shape my decision-making. By midlife, marriage is no longer just about two people falling in love. It becomes a networked relationship. And every outside voice carries weight, pressure, and influence. That includes adult children, ex-partners, extended family, friends with options and opinions, pets. Yes, I did say pets, pet parents, pets, jobs or careers, civic, spiritual, or religious organizations, our rigid mindsets and ideologies, inflexible customs and traditions, health issues, big one, finances, unresolved loyalty conflicts, our parents, huge one, and social media behavior. That's a whole video all by itself. And let's be honest, none of these influences are neutral. They all, on each side, present their own biases. The part that people underestimate is when you enter a marriage, you don't just marry a person. You inherit their emotional alliances, their obligations, their loyalties, their unresolved attachments, and their external pressures, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, but always consistently. Marriage is the ultimate institution that symbolizes solidarity. Let me say a word again. Solidarity. And if solidarity doesn't exist in the marriage, that means that the third party influences are running the show. If decisions are constantly filtered through the opinions of adult children, the parents' opinion and expectations, the ex-partner's emotional residue, the opinions of friends, the validation of social media, the religious or ideological rigidities, then the marriage is already negotiating against itself. You are not even playing the leading roles in your own marriage. The moment a third party has more influence than the marriage, equal influence to the marriage, or veto power over the marriage, unity in the marriage erodes. It is gone. And instead of two adults operating as a unified unit, the relationship becomes reactive, defensive, triangulated, and emotionally fragmented. You are no longer building with each other. You are managing everything and everyone else that has nothing at all to do with the actual marriage. At this stage of life, people come with long-standing routines, deeply embedded identities, entrenched loyalties, fixed beliefs and value systems, and very little flexibility. which means if boundaries are not clear, firm, and mutually respected, marriage becomes a constant negotiation of whose voice matters most, whose needs come first, and whose needs get deferred. That is not partnership. That is pressure management. That is not a relationship. That, my friends, is a battleship. So, my position is simple and personal. If we cannot operate as a unified unit, the marriage is already fractured. I am not interested in competing with external voices, negotiating my place in my own relationship, having to explain or defend my decisions as to the choices that I make in my own lane, forfeiting my newfound peace to appease third-party influences. For at this season of my life, I am not seeking validation, affirmation, or appreciation from anyone in regard to my decision making. So I'll ask you, does that make me shallow? Or does it mean that I truly understand that a marriage cannot survive when too many outside voices are dictating the marriage? Reason number 3, decision-making, independence, and autonomy. I am no longer willing to compromise my decision-making, independence, and autonomy because marriage naturally requires compromise and concession. I get it. I understand that. But I've come to realize that compromise, when taken too far, can slowly become the enemy of being you. For years, I used that societal, conditioned phrase, happy wife, happy life. And more often than not, that phrase translated into me acquiescing to things I wasn't fully comfortable with, choices I didn't fully align with, decisions I quietly swallowed just to keep the peace. What I've learned since then is this, folks. My happiness matters too. I am no longer willing to place someone else's needs, comfort, or preferences above my own internal or external alignment. At this stage of my life, my clarity matters. My decisiveness matters. My internal and external alignment matters far more to me than constant consensus. Because when you are continually negotiating everyday decisions and major life decisions with everyone else, you slowly begin to outsource your own inner authority. And that erosion doesn't just happen overnight. It's very subtle. It is very quiet. It is very incremental. But it is very real. Especially when two people are still evolving. Oftentimes in different directions, at different speeds, with different levels of self-awareness. At this point in my life, I value being able to make decisions that are aligned with who I am now, without friction, without justification, and without having to negotiate who I am as a human being. I get to determine what decisions are negotiable and what decisions are non-negotiable. I've came too far. I have done too much work to lose everything I have built through my individuation journey. I am wiser now. I am calmer now. I am more grounded now. I have gained knowledge, wisdom, and understanding through my lived experience. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I know who I am fully as an individual. I understand my gifts, talents, and assets. And I am also honest, candid, and transparent with myself first about my shortcomings and liabilities that still require daily work. I have solidified my belief system. I have solidified my value system. I have solidified my internal compass. I have fully reinvented myself. I have built and designed a life to my specifications. And in this season of my life, it is a beautiful thing. I get to choose. I get to choose. I get to pick, choose, and refuse what I subscribe to. I no longer force myself to care about things that I genuinely don't care about in this society to appease anyone anymore. No props, no roles, no posturing or positioning, no going along to get along, no buffering myself to make other people comfortable. My relationships now organize themselves around my truth, my authentic self. For I no longer shrink myself anymore to be accepted by anyone. Now, this peace comes from trusting that I can consistently make sound decisions for myself based on everything I've been through over the course of my adult life. I live the way I live because of how I lived. So I ask you again, does that make me shallow? Or does it mean that I value peace, clarity, and inner authority more than societal expectations? Reason number 4. Resistance to boundaries. I am no longer willing to marry someone who feels threatened by my boundaries instead of being respectful of my boundaries. Because here's what I've learned. When you set a boundary with resistant people, it is like shining a light on something they've spent years trying to hide, which is their need for control. That resistance doesn't come from love. It comes from unresolved issues that were never confronted. And those issues often show up as an obsessive and unhealthy ambition, addiction, caretaking, people-pleasing, codependency, family secrets, pride, ego, self-will, narcissistic traits, and there are others. When you set boundaries with people carrying these traits, they don't see your boundaries as self-respect. They see your boundaries as a threat because boundaries interrupt their access. Boundaries interrupt their control. Boundaries interrupt their entitlement. If you ever felt like you were drowning in people who constantly drained your energy, manipulated your emotions, tried to control you, or made you doubt your own reality, self-esteem, or self-worth, trust me, you are not alone. And let me say this clearly. When you set a boundary with emotionally immature people, they often respond with combativeness, victimhood, gaslighting. That response doesn't mean your boundaries are wrong. It actually means that they are working. Emotionally immature people thrive on control, confusion, emotional exhaustion. They will twist the circumstances. They will rewrite the narratives. They will reposition themselves as the victim. And they will attempt to convince you that you are the problem. Man, wait. Let's be clear about what boundaries are not. Boundaries are not punishments. They are not walls. They are not ultimatums. Boundaries are letting people know what you will accept and what you will not accept in relationships. So, if someone feels threatened by my boundaries, that tells me something very important. That they were benefiting from my lack of boundaries. A marriage does not fix boundary issues. Marriage magnifies them. Love in a marriage, to me, looks like this. Peace, serenity, tranquility, respect, trust, consideration, empathy, compassion, emotional safety, equality, mutual respect, reciprocity. Love should not feel like walking on eggshells. It should not feel like constant stress and duress. It should not require emotional surveillance or damage control, because when you are tied to the emotionally immature, the narcissist, or anyone who constantly drains you, you are not living. You are merely existing. You are constantly operating in crisis mode. You are constantly operating in survival mode. You are constantly managing fallout. But when you finally decide that your peace is more valuable than anyone else's approval, something shifts. You begin reclaiming your emotional freedom. Your body feels lighter. Your thoughts become clearer. Your spirit becomes calmer. Namaste. You feel better physically overall. You stop waiting for the next argument. You stop bracing for the next silent treatment. You stop performing just to receive basic human respect. You stop begging for the bare minimum. And eventually, you realize something very powerful. Peace is not something someone gives you. You are peace, all by yourself. And your peace becomes the thing that you value most, the thing that you protect, the thing that you are no longer willing to sacrifice for what amounts to basically a coin flip as to whether the marriage will be successful or not. I will not. I will never take that risk ever again. So I ask you, again, does that make me shallow? Or does that make me conscious, aware, and committed to protecting my peace? Reason number 5, the cost of failure. The cost of failure if the marriage does not work out. Ooh-wee! I am no longer willing to absorb the emotional, psychological, and financial consequences of another unsuccessful marriage. Not me. No, not me. I just ended year 5 of my divorce. And as I move into year 6, I can see very clearly how hard it was to come back to center after the marriage ended. Divorce doesn't just end the relationship. It dismantles your entire life existence. You have to rebuild yourself holistically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and especially financially. Trust me. Divorce is not a reset. Trust me. It is not a fresh start. It is starting from ground zero. And the truth is, I do not have another comeback like that in me. Not me. If I were to marry again and it failed, I do not have the mental, emotional, or psychological bandwidth to rebuild my life all over again. I have more years behind me than ahead of me, and I will not spend those years recovering from the decision of getting married again and it ending up not working out again. During divorce, both parties scramble. Everyone tries to protect themselves. Everyone tries to secure what they can, but here's what I've learned the hard way. There are no winners in divorce. Everyone takes losses. Financial losses. Emotional losses. Family losses. Identity losses. And at this stage of my life, folks, I have no more L's to give. Divorce after 50 is not just painful, it is downright demoralizing and destabilizing. It affects your mental health, your long-term financial security, your retirement planning, your emotional recovery timelines. The bounce back period is so much longer. The margin for error is so much thinner. And the cost is far greater. So, me choosing not to be married is not about fear. It is not about bitterness. It is not about cynicism. It is about risk assessment. Let me say this differently. What is the ROI? Meaning, what is the return on my investment? What am I profiting at this season of my life from getting married? Overall, marriage seems to be much more problems than profit at this season for me. For me, not being married again is self-preservation, is wisdom earned through my life experience, and it is honoring the life that I've worked so hard to rebuild. So I'll ask you just one more time, rhetorically, does that make me shallow? Or does it make me intentional, conscious, and protective of my life, the life that I have left to live? So when I say I will never marry again, this isn't coming from anger, this isn't coming from resentment, and this is definitely not coming from fear. It is coming from my lived experience. Over time, I have learned something very important about myself. I have learned that I value emotional responsibility, internal and external alignment, decision-making autonomy, healthy boundaries, and overall, I value my peace more than I value the institution of marriage. Marriage at this stage of life often asks for the merging of unresolved emotional baggage, the management of third-party influences, the surrender of personal autonomy, the erosion of boundaries, and going along with risk that I am no longer willing to take at this point in my life. That doesn't make marriage wrong. It simply makes marriage wrong for me. I've done the work to heal. I've done the work to individuate. I have done the work to understand who I am at this season of my life. And because of that work, I am no longer willing to lose myself in someone else's unfinished healing, organize my life around emotional chaos, negotiate away my inner authority, explain or defend my boundaries, or rebuild my life from the ground up all over again if it collapses. At this stage and season of my life, folks, I'm just chilling. I don't want any drama. I don't want any toxicity. I do not want burdens. I do not want emotional labor disguised as love. I want peace. I want clarity. I want mutual respect. I want emotional maturity. I want reciprocity. And I have learned that marriage does not guarantee you any of those things. So my decision is not about closing my heart. It is all about protecting my heart. It is all about having companionship that makes deposits in my life, not having companionship that make constant withdrawals. It is about being fully present as myself without shrinking, buffering, or abandoning myself for anyone anymore. I am not anti-love. I am not anti-commitment. I am not anti-partnership. I am pro-conscious connection. I am pro-self-respect. I am pro-peace. And at this point in my life, I'm afraid that means that I would never ever marry again. I waved the white flag of surrender to marriage. So I'll leave you with this just one more time. Does that make me shallow? Or does it make me honest, self-aware, and deeply deeply intentional. So, continue being the best version of yourself today, and then doing the work to get even better tomorrow. Feel, deal, heal, protect your peace. This is GBIC Relationship University, the Relationship Problems channel, where we find relationship solutions and get better together. Be blessed, everyone.